Welcome to the Ask Junior Daily Judgment podcast. I'm Priya Sharma, and joining me today is Arjun Gupta.
Hello, everyone. We're excited to dive into today's crucial judgment from the Supreme Court of India. But before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast if you enjoy our daily legal breakdowns. Your support helps us reach more listeners and continue providing in-depth analysis of the latest court decisions.
Absolutely. Now, let's get started with today's case. Urmila Dixit versus Sunil Sharan Dixit and Ors. This case, 2025 INSC 20, deals with a very important issue, the rights of senior citizens and the legal mechanisms in place to protect them.
Exactly, Priya. This case revolves around a mother, Urmila Dixit, who gifted her property to her son, Sunil Sharan Dixit, under the condition that he would take care of her and her husband for the rest of their lives. Unfortunately, the relationship soured, and Urmila felt her son wasn't upholding his end of the agreement.
So, Urmila went to court seeking to have the gift deed nullified. She filed a petition under Section 23 of the Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act, 2007.
That's right. Let's break down the key facts. Urmila purchased the property in 1968. Then, in 2019, she gifted it to her son Sunil, with the understanding that he would provide her with basic amenities and care. But the agreement was complicated, and the legal question arose regarding the enforceability of that condition.
The lower courts, including the subdivisional magistrate and the collector, sided with Urmila, finding that the gift deed was null and void. They ruled that the conditions weren't met. However, the High Court of Madhya Pradesh reversed that decision.
The High Court felt Section 23 of the Act was a standalone provision. They argued that since there wasn't a specific clause about maintenance in the gift deed itself, it couldn't be invalidated. They believed that the agreement was a separate matter, not directly governed by the Act.
Essentially, the High Court seemed to be saying that if the parties had wanted a maintenance clause to be legally binding, they should have explicitly included it in the gift deed.
That brings us to the legal question at the heart of this case. What constitutes a legally binding agreement for maintenance of a senior citizen under Section 23 of the Act? Is it enough to have a separate written agreement, a promissory note, or does it have to be specifically mentioned within the property transfer document?
The Supreme Court ultimately decided that the High Court's interpretation was too narrow and didn't consider the overall intent of the legislation. This act, like many others designed to protect vulnerable groups, should be given a liberal construction.
That means the Supreme Court favored a broader interpretation of the Act. They looked at the intent behind the legislation, which is to protect senior citizens from being exploited, particularly in situations where they've transferred property to their children.
In essence, the court said that the agreement, whether it's in a promissory note or a separate document, should be considered in conjunction with the gift deed. If the transfer was made with the understanding that the transferee would provide basic amenities, and they fail to do so, the transfer can be declared void.
That's very significant because it sets a precedent that the law isn't just about the wording of the contract, it's about the underlying agreement and the spirit of the law.
To further explain this, imagine a scenario where a senior citizen has transferred a property to their child with the promise of being taken care of, but there's no mention of maintenance in the transfer deed itself. Now imagine that child starts neglecting the senior citizen. This judgment says that the child cannot escape the obligations of their agreement simply because it wasn't explicitly mentioned in the deed.
Think of it like this. If you buy a product from a store with a warranty, but the warranty is not written on the receipt, does that mean you're not entitled to it? Of course not. The Supreme Court is saying that the spirit of the agreement, the understanding between the parties, should be taken into account, even if it's not formally written down.
The court also mentioned that this interpretation isn't a loophole for senior citizens to exploit. The conditions need to be established. There must be an understanding of maintenance, and the transferee must actually fail to provide those amenities.
Exactly. The court emphasized that the Act is not meant to be used for malicious purposes. It's meant to be a tool for genuine protection, not an opportunity for manipulation. It's clear that this judgment is a victory for senior citizens and their rights.
Yes, the court further clarified the authority of the tribunal under the Act. The High Court had suggested that the tribunal could only assess if the gift deed contained a maintenance clause, but the Supreme Court disagreed. They pointed out that tribunals under the Act have the power to order eviction if it's necessary to protect the senior citizen's rights.
It's important to remember that the Act's purpose is to provide speedy and inexpensive remedies for the elderly. Therefore, the tribunal needs the power to ensure that the senior citizen's needs are met and that they are protected from exploitation.
This judgment has significant implications for the rights of senior citizens in India. It reaffirms their right to be protected from potential exploitation by their own family members. It also highlights the importance of the Act's goal, providing speedy and accessible remedies to those who need them.
It's essential to note that there were no dissenting opinions in this case. The Supreme Court seemed to be unanimous in its interpretation of the Act, which strengthens the judgment's impact and provides a clear direction for future cases involving senior citizens and property transfer agreements.
Furthermore, this case aligns with previous legal decisions in India where courts have consistently recognized the need for a broad interpretation of laws designed to protect vulnerable groups.
This case further strengthens the argument that the law should be interpreted in a way that reflects its purpose, especially when dealing with issues of social justice and the protection of vulnerable individuals.
And that wraps up our analysis of today's judgment. We hope you found our discussion informative and engaging. This case underscores the importance of ensuring that senior citizens have the legal protections they deserve.
Before we sign off, we'd like to remind our listeners once again to like, subscribe, and share our podcast. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you daily updates on the most important legal decisions.
Absolutely. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow for another exciting episode. Until then, this is Priya Sharma.
And Arjun Gupta, signing off. Thanks for listening to the Ask Junior Daily Judgment podcast.